Hello everyone! I am very excited today to give you my official review of Godzilla Minus One. When I saw it the first time back in December, I shared my first impressions, but I avoided discussing details and spoilers. Now that more people have seen it though, I can get into all that, and I do have a lot to say, so this is going to be a long one. You might be able to tell I have a cold, so I apologize if this turns out a bit wonky. Hopefully I don't sound as bad to you as I do to myself. Godzilla Minus One is the 37th film in the franchise overall, and the 5th entry in Toho's Reiwa era, released for the 70th anniversary of the original 1954 Gojira. The film was written and directed by Takashi Yamazaki, who also did the visual effects and made the bold choice to set the film in the 1940s, beginning in the last days of World War II. Yunosuke Kamiki stars as Koichi Shikishima, a kamikaze pilot who lands at a repair base on Odo Island, claiming to have plane trouble, but really shirking his duty. That night, a dinosaur-like beast comes ashore and attacks the base, killing all but Shikishima and the lead mechanic, who holds him responsible for his friend's senseless and violent deaths. Ashamed of his failures, Shikishima returns home after the war to find Tokyo in shambles and his parents dead, and anyone who knows he was a kamikaze pilot knows he was not supposed to survive the war. As Japan struggles to get back on its feet, Shikishima reluctantly takes in a young woman and an orphaned baby, and soon things start to look up. But his guilt won't let him accept this little family and be happy, and when Godzilla re-emerges and bears down on Japan, Shikishima is forced to confront his past. Most of you already know how much I enjoyed this movie. I said this in my first impressions video, and I feel even more sure of it now. It's a great Godzilla movie, and a great movie in general. Every aspect of it is well done. It looks nice, it sounds awesome, it's well acted, it's got a meaningful story with lovable, developed characters, and it's got excitement and intensity and a remarkable portrayal of the monster that is unique while including familiar elements from past films. It's thrilling for fans, but you don't have to be a fan to find it an engaging and rewarding experience. You might remember I went to see it with my dad. He's not into Godzilla or monsters or science fiction or foreign films with subtitles, but he liked this. And I heard from many of you who went to see it with parents, significant others, siblings, friends, not Godzilla fans, and they loved it and were deeply moved by it. In quite a few, some would say many, of the films in the franchise, the human element is flimsy and almost disposable, but Godzilla Minus One's primary goal is to tell an emotionally complex, character-driven story. And boy does it succeed! The whole narrative revolves around Koichi Shikishima, his shame, and his redemption. He's a coward, there's no doubt about that, but one racked with survivor's guilt and PTSD. I love Ryunosuke Kamiki's performance. This is some of the best, most sincere acting I've ever seen in a Godzilla movie. Your heart breaks for the character, and you want him to pull through, not just so his countrymen can forgive him, but so he can forgive himself. Shikishima didn't just fail to do his duty in the war. I think he feels the burden of responsibility for every life Godzilla takes. The mechanics on Odo Island, but also the crew of the Takao and the thousands of victims in Ginza might not be dead if he had stayed in his plane and fired his gun. Now, chances are those 20mm bullets would not have killed Godzilla, but he doesn't know that. Though I doubt there's much about this character's specific background that anyone today can identify with, he is still a relatable character. I never thought that I would relate to a kamikaze pilot like this, but I do. We all know what it's like to be afraid, to want to run away from a responsibility that demands too much, to be haunted by a terrible memory, or to feel undeserving because of past wrongs. This is not the first time a Godzilla movie has had a developed, compelling protagonist or a good, dramatic story, but it's almost unheard of for one to have such a centralized narrative. Usually these movies are packed with characters and the script jumps from place to place. Here, it stays with Shikishima most of the time, and there are really only 9 characters to speak of. Shikishima, Noriko, and Akiko, the doc, the captain, and the kid, Sumiko the neighbor, and Tachibana the mechanic, who are both bitter but good characters, and the guy who leads the citizens' effort to defeat Godzilla. I didn't catch his name. Minami Hamabe is great as Noriko. At first she seems like she's gonna be sassy and difficult, but I think that's her wartime survival mode. She's really gentle and nurturing, a selfless, encouraging woman who brings warmth to the ramshackle remains of Shikishima's parents' house. She's just the kind of person he needs to open up to if he'd only take the chance. Little Akiko is adorable, cute as a baby, cute as a toddler, a very sensitive child, and I love the boat crew. The good-natured Doc with his crazy hair and his optimism, the opinionated captain with his wisecracks and his disdain for government, and the buoyant kid with his naive hunger for action. 3 distinct personalities, all likable, all serving an individual purpose, but also great as a trio. And they're fun. Their interactions bring little bits of comic relief. I know some people joke that no one watches Godzilla for the plot or the human characters. They take it for granted that the story's gonna be messy or ridiculous, and the people are gonna be goofy or one-dimensional, and it doesn't matter because all they really want is monsters knocking down buildings and beating each other up. Well, that's not enough for me. Yeah, sure, it's fun to see monsters pummel each other for a bit, but that gets boring. I want substance, I want variety, I want some kind of journey. And I do think it's best when the human element is done well and matters, which is why I'm so grateful that Yamazaki spent years honing his script and then took the time to cast talented actors who were perfect for their roles, who the global audience could relate to and take seriously. But there is not so much focus on the humans that Godzilla gets shoved to the side. Oh no, Godzilla still dominates. Mere minutes into the film, we get our first look, and it's one of the most terrifying Godzilla introductions ever. Though he's much smaller in this scene than he is later in his irradiated form, he's still a very large animal that easily defeats the mechanics, chomping on them and tossing them through the air in a surprising display of violence. Godzilla doesn't usually bite people. Note that here he does not attack the men until they open fire. But after his mutation, he seems to have a vendetta against the human race and needs no provocation to go on a rampage. Yamazaki's Godzilla has rapid regenerative properties, which naturally makes him harder to kill for good. I thought the foamy effect for this was interesting. I appreciate that his skin, though it looks tough, isn't armor-like. He takes hits and sustains damage, and what grows back is rough and patchy. It's like scar tissue, and he seems to have scabs and burn marks from the nuclear tests. Yamazaki cites 2001's Godzilla, Mothra, and King Ghidorah Giant Monsters All-Out Attack as a major influence. It's funny, because I didn't like that one as much. It was not one of my favorites of the Millennium era. There are certain elements from GMK that he reused, but for me, this Godzilla was reminiscent of the Godzilla 2000 design. He's got the same wide neck, bit like a Cardassian, super pointy dorsal spikes that could poke your eye out, and a take-no-prisoners attitude. He has a particularly mean, menacing expression. His feet are ginormous. Actually, his whole bottom half seems significantly larger than the top half, which gives him an awkward, lumbering gait on land. But each step covers a lot of ground, and he tends to obliterate anything in his path. As others have pointed out, there's an emphasis on collateral damage here. He wipes out entire buildings by just turning around, and his tail has a mind of its own. But what strikes me most about this whole design are his eyes. Godzilla has had some derpy eyeballs in the past, but when I look into these glaring eyes, I see pure rage and burning hatred. The effects look great. There was some mystery over the film's budget. For a while there, everyone was saying it was $15 million, which is insanely low for a movie like this in 2023. But then Yamazaki came out and was like, I wish we had had $15 million. It's now estimated to have been 10 to 12 million, which is even more impressive. And I can't believe I have gotten this far into this video without mentioning that, hey, this movie won an Academy Award for Best Visual Effects, which is nuts. It's nuts that a Godzilla movie was nominated, and then it won? Godzilla took home an Oscar? I don't think I saw any of the other nominees, but I believe this history-making award was well-deserved, not just for the big stuff, like the monster and the destruction sequences, but for the smaller things you aren't meant to notice so much, like the detailed recreation of 1940s Japan, bombed-out Tokyo stretching into the horizon, Ginza on its way to becoming a bustling city, and then Ginza completely devastated. The Ginza sequence is the most astounding 8 minutes I've ever seen in a Godzilla movie. Starting with the train car hurtling through the air and crashing into the tracks, and then the shot where Noriko turns and sees Godzilla out the window, which is also when composer Naoki Sato surprises us with the Godzilla theme. It was really hard to contain myself in the theater when that happened. There's a lovely tribute to the 1954 film with Godzilla picking up the train in his mouth while Noriko is in the train car, desperately hanging on. Awesome effects work in these shots. And you're thinking, wow, this is so cool! And then it keeps going. Somehow, Shikishima finds Noriko in the crowd. Yay! But before they can get away, Godzilla is attacked by tanks and counters by unveiling his new weapon, his atomic breath, referred to here as his heat ray. The design is awesome, the way it looks, the way it loads, the way it sounds. And when he fires, the result is jaw-dropping. But just as the blast wave hits, which is immediately followed by the blast wind that sends everything surging in the opposite direction, Noriko pushes Shikishima to safety and is herself blown away. I think the entire theater was in shock when this whole thing happened. The atomic detonation, the intensity of the blast, and then the audacity to kill off a main character just when she and the protagonist were about to turn a corner. It's startling, it's demoralizing, and when Shikishima realizes what's happened, his confusion gives way to horror, grief, and anger, and he lets out these feral screams that just rip you apart. There are some things in this movie that I have thought about many times over the last 6 months, and that's one of them. I've also got to mention, though, the way Godzilla stands there, gazing up at the cloud. There's something poetic about the moment, horrifying as it is, and one wonders if he knew how powerful his attack would be, or if it was a surprise to him as well. On the whole, the film maintains a steady pace to fit the entire story into 2 hours. But if there's a slow period, it's when the men gather to formulate a plan to stop Godzilla. The plot is still moving, but there's a lot of talking and conjecturing here. I do respect the ingenuity and originality of Dr. Noda's plan. It's very simple, and it's not a surprise when it doesn't work.
はずですって。はずばっかだな、お前。いや、そもそもなんとか式浮上装置あれで引き上げるってやつ俺うまくいくとは思わねえんだがな。
But I had been curious to see what the film would do within the confines of the time period. This isn't some pseudo-reality or not-so-distant future where they have advanced tech and whoosy-whatsits at their disposal. They've got to work with what they've got. And what they've got is bubbles and balloons. Some people, who hadn't seen the movie, were quick to argue that it didn't make sense for the Japanese to be manning guns and destroyers when strict rules against weaponization had been imposed under U.S. occupation, and the self-defense forces weren't implemented until '54. But the film explains all of that. The U.S. doesn't want to provoke World War III by moving into an area so close to the Soviet Union, so Japan is encouraged to take on the sea creature on its own. That may come across as anti-American, but I thought the film was more critical of the Japanese government and its insistence on secrecy and the suppression of information. And when the military fails to defend the citizens must step up and defend themselves. Shikishima plays a key role in the plan, volunteering to fly a plane close enough to Godzilla to lure him into a trap. My dad was very impressed to learn that the fighter plane, the Shinden, was a real experimental aircraft, fast and powerful enough to have given the Japanese a serious advantage in the war if they had had the chance to use it. What Shikishima doesn't divulge is that he intends to make up for his past failures by flying the plane, loaded with explosives, straight into Godzilla's mouth. This would be a heroic sacrifice for a worthy cause, and it's his willingness to die to save others that redeems him. When he's in that plane, it's the most poised we've ever seen him, like he's found his way at last. But he's not the only one getting redemption here. Tachibana, the mechanic, lets go of his grudge in order to help Shikishima and ultimately offer him a way out. And there's redemption for Japan. These men are all veterans who survived the madness of war and the humiliation of defeat. They're also eager to participate in a more worthy cause. Dr. Noda states that for too long, Japan treated life too cheaply, taking people's lives for granted in pursuit of victory. But these men want to live, and they're determined that in this war, no life will be sacrificed. The last 15-20 minutes of the film are exhilarating. Shikishima's flying around, irritating Godzilla, and narrowly missing getting swiped out of the sky. I love Naoki Sato's inclusion of the famous Godzilla March, and then how it segues into the main title theme from King Kong vs. Godzilla. That's another moment where I was in the theater just like, ah! The music sounds so good, and it fits so well. I love when the kid shows up with the tugboats, reminiscent of the British citizens coming to get the soldiers off the beach at Dunkirk in 1940. And then you've got this horrifying shot of a gnarly, half-dead Godzilla preparing to blow everyone to smithereens. He looks deranged, with his eyes bulging and his jaw unhinged. It's the stuff of nightmares. There's this breathless moment where the plane goes in, thunk, and we're waiting, and then it blows up and splits Godzilla's head wide open, which was shocking and kind of awesome. I mean, normally, there are other Godzilla movies where Godzilla dies and it's emotional, you know, you feel sorry for him, but this is not one of those cases. Even if you love Godzilla, this version of him is just too nasty to root for. Especially after what happened to Noriko. That made it personal. That said, how about that howl as he crumbles to pieces? Then the last couple minutes are the big wrap-up, and it's one somber but joyous thing after another. Godzilla's defeated, and everyone salutes. Shikishima did not kill himself. Tachibana, who hated him before, celebrates that he made it out alive. And then we get the moment that sealed the deal for me. Words cannot convey the surge of emotion I felt watching him rush up the stairs with the baby. It was like, can it be? Is it possible? And it was, and I wanted to burst into tears of happiness and relief. If you aren't touched by that last scene where Shikishima is reunited with Noriko, I don't know, you might want to check for a pulse. Godzilla Minus One was a huge success in Japan and overseas, where it got a far warmer reception than anyone anticipated. That led to an extended release, big box office returns, and new records, making Godzilla Minus One one for the film history textbooks. You can find lots of critics offering their opinions on the whys and wherefores of its success in the United States. I don't have any original thoughts on that, and I don't want to just parrot what I've heard other people say, so I won't go into that. But it is an interesting indication of the state of things in Hollywood today. I'm just glad to have contributed to its success, and me and my dad went again to see Godzilla minus one minus color. I think the black and white version looks really nice. It's not just lazy desaturation or a filter. Yamazaki's team painstakingly went through the film to make sure every frame looked good. As many others have said, it reminds you of the 1954 film and makes you feel like you could be watching the movie in the same year in which it's set. I know some people prefer the black and white version, but though you know I love black and white movies, I do prefer the color version. I really like the warm color palette, and I felt the hues and the details on the sets and the texture of the costumes and Godzilla's skin popped more in color. But I can understand why people embraced the black and white version, and why some people say that it's the version that they'll watch more often from now on. Obviously, I don't agree with a tiny fraction of the population that claims this movie is overhyped and overrated. I believe it got exactly as much attention and praise as it deserved, and personally, I've gotten the impression that those people are miffed that certain other Godzilla films didn't get the same attention and accolades. Can't please all the people all the time. I will divulge that I didn't want to admit this, but I was not as excited as everyone else when this movie was coming out. I saw the teaser, and then I saw the trailer. I think I only watched both of them once or twice, and I was skeptical. I wasn't sure about the setting and the kamikaze pilot protagonist and how all of it would work. Godzilla looked kind of strange to me, and I had no clue what the title meant. I couldn't even get my brain to remember it. I kept calling it Godzilla minus zero. I still think it's an iffy title. I've heard the explanation that after the war, Japan's in a bad place. Economically, they're at zero. And then Godzilla comes and the destruction brings them even lower, minus one. It's kind of weird, and I can understand people being put off by it. But you shouldn't let that deter you from watching the movie. And I only bring all of this up to show that I was not on board the I love this movie and it's the best Godzilla movie ever train before I even saw it. Some people are like that. They've already decided that they love a movie when it hasn't even come out yet. I don't do that. I was really unsure about this one, but it did not take me long as I was watching it to realize this is something else. This is really good. After seeing it 4 times now, the worst thing I can say about it is that I still don't like how a couple lines were translated in the English subtitles. Sumiko answering, "Say what?" is just too modern for me. That's not 1940s. But fortunately, those lines don't hurt the big picture. I would also say that this may be the least accessible Godzilla movie for children, which is odd because some people think that Godzilla movies are exclusively made for kids. My sister took my nephew to see it, but since he hadn't yet learned about World War II in school, that whole aspect, a major part of the movie, was hard for him to grasp. My sister was trying to explain to him about kamikaze pilots in the theater, and I'm sure he's not the only kid who was lost. But kids aren't dumb. They pick up on basic emotions, even if they don't fully comprehend the rationale behind them. And if that's not enough, it's still got destruction and stuff blowing up. I feel like I haven't talked about the music enough. I love what Naoki Sato did with the score. His own music does a lot to enhance the mood. like the ominous tone that surges as Godzilla approaches the minesweeping boat, and the music when Godzilla attacks the Takao with the bells and the choir creating a sense of doom. And the theme that plays throughout the climax, while simple and repetitive, I found did a lot to dial up the intensity and suspense as the layers of story were coming together. It somehow combines a feeling of tragedy and a feeling of hope, which plays so well into the action. But of course, the most exciting musical moments for a Godzilla fan are the ones when Sato chose to include Akira Ifukube's musical themes. They're sparingly used, but so good. The orchestrations and the tempo are perfect. When I did my first impressions video, I said there was a theme in there that I recognized, but I couldn't put my finger on what it was. And then I just kept humming it for hours and hours, and I realized it was the same melody as Maharama Sura, but slowed down and a little bit different, and I thought that I was done, that that's what it was, but then finally people helped me figure out that both parts of the music in the Ginza score in the Ginza scene are from the main titles of 1964's Mothra vs. Godzilla. I love that Sato chose to feature that film as it's one of the best sequels. Speaking of sequels, Godzilla Minus One leaves a big opening, showing a mysterious mark on Noriko's neck, and showing a chunk of Godzilla regenerating in the ocean. I'm definitely curious. That ending prompted a lot of questions. One has to wonder how on earth she survived, and what the heck she's been contaminated with. A couple months ago, Yamazaki confirmed that it has something to do with Godzilla's cells. So, what, is she a mutant now? There are a lot of different directions you could go in with that. They're all kind of disturbing. He's said that he would like to maybe bring in another kaiju. Okay, is the other kaiju gonna be Noriko? I'm kind of torn on the idea of a sequel. I would love to see these characters again, but I really like them. So I don't necessarily want to see them suffer anymore. I want them to go off and be happy. I don't want this movie's resolution to be undermined. Of course, I'd like to know what happens next, but if for some reason they never do a follow-up, I wouldn't be miserable about it. It's not like this ended with a cliffhanger. But if they do make a sequel, I'll certainly see it, and I'll even be excited for it, especially if they take their time and make it as good as this movie. Godzilla Minus One is one of those films I wish I could experience for the first time again. That's how enjoyable and exhilarating the first viewing was. There's nothing like the rush of hearing Godzilla's theme burst out at you, or the shock of the Ginza sequence, or the tension of the final scenes when you're hoping so desperately that Shikishima will live. But now that I've seen it 4 times, and I know I'm going to revisit it in the future, I am confident that it doesn't lose its power with multiple viewings. It's still incredibly satisfying, and I may have even more appreciation for it now than I did last December. Is it now my favorite Godzilla movie? I'm not sure I'm ready to commit to that yet, but it's a possibility. I hope you enjoyed this review. I would love to hear your thoughts on this movie, so please feel free to share them in the comments below, and I'll be back next week with another video. Thanks for watching.